Hi, my name is Patricia Lee. I was a teacher for GED classes for the Department of Corrections for 13 years. I would like to say that I preface my remarks by saying I retired September 30th of 2010, so what I say is at least 2.5 years old, but I think it probably still applies. A little bit about me. I began my career in 1997 at the Michigan Reformatory. Warden Withrow was the warden. She was the first woman warden in the state of Michigan, and she was an excellent person to work for. Reformatory was also known as the Gladiator School when I started because of the number of young prisoners in the facility. It was a level 4, but sometimes considered a level 5. In December of 2010, the reformatory was closed, and the whole staff, the whole prison was moved around the corner to Bellamy Creek. Ken McKee became the warden. He was an excellent warden also. He came up through programs and always supported the school and the staff. The prison began as a level 4, went to a 3-4 security, and ended up as a 2-4 security level. When I was hired in, I was the writing person, so to speak. But later teachers were required to teach all subjects, reading, math, and writing skills to all levels. By the end of my career, I also taught English language learners or ESL students. I did vocational counseling. I helped with the parenting program. I was in charge of GED and vocational graduations. And at one point, I was on the curriculum committee for the state. Well, I have 3 areas of concern I would like to share with you from an insider's perspective. One is mental health issues. The second is the numerous transfers of some prisoners. And the third is the lack of employment in programs within the prison system. I have 2 situations that stick with me regarding the mental health of prisoners. One began on a slow afternoon with my level 4 students. Things were real quiet after lunch. An officer entered my classroom looking for a prisoner. He asked if he were in my room, and I said no. So he looked over my class and loudly asked if Mr. Smith, number such and such, was there. One of my students became agitated. He jumped up, hollering at the officer, "Stop looking at me like that." And the officer responded, "I'm not looking at you unless you're Mr. Smith." The student continued yelling, and the officer called for backup. If you've ever been in a situation in prison when something like that happens, the first thing you do is take a deep breath and step back because you don't want to be in the middle of anything that's coming down. The room fills with correctional officers, and the student was taken out in shackles. Come to find out, he was a paranoid schizophrenic. I knew something was not quite right with him. He wanted to sit by himself. He always facing the door. He did not interact with other students. He kept everything to himself. But he had never been violent in the classroom. Could this situation have been handled better by the officer and myself? Of course. The second situation is troubling also. I had a student in my last class of the day who was also schizophrenic. He was, however, continually talking to someone who was not there. He did this for the whole class period, which was about an hour and a half. He could talk to me and answer my questions and do some classwork, but for the whole period carried on this conversation with someone. I found the psychiatric nurse after about the 3rd day of class and was told the student was on the list to go to MTU, where there's a unit for prisoners needing medication, and would be transferred there when there was a spot for him. He was in class approximately 3 weeks. After he left, one of my other students came up and told me that this gentleman had been his bunkie. Imagine living in a confined space with someone with a serious mental illness for any length of time. What would have helped these situations? Well, to begin with, by not locking up mentally ill people would be the best option. I understand that the legislature is considering mental health courts like veterans courts and drug courts. That would solve some of these problems. Another help would be training the staff to be better educated about mental illness. Behaviors could be much better understood if we knew what to look for. Staff wouldn't need to diagnose or treat the mentally ill, but recognize these behaviors as part of the illness. As a teacher, I was never introduced to students with mental illness. I never was introduced to students with mental illnesses, but working within the prison system, I have met many who would qualify for having mental health issues. Bipolar, paranoid schizophrenics, ADHD, Asperger's syndrome, obsessive-compulsive individuals are all there. To know what behaviors to watch out for would certainly be helpful. One other idea is letting the rules bend a bit for those who are suffering with a break from reality. The first student I mentioned didn't really need to go to segregation. A cooling off period would have probably worked. But when a person is taken away in shackles and handcuffs, major tickets have to be written. The officer really had no choice. I was told not to send a student back to his housing unit unless I wrote a ticket. So if someone was having a bad day and I thought they should go back, I couldn't send him back just to send him back. I think the treating of the mentally ill humanely as possible should be part of the mission of the Department of Corrections. Another issue that is much discussed by family members is the issue of transfers. Some prisoners, for reasons not explained, are moved many times. As a teacher, I can say that as a prisoner is transferred, the chances of losing his file grows. Although I worked with an excellent secretary who went out of her way to get files, we would occasionally find someone whose work was gone, especially if that someone had been transferred multiple times. As a prisoner moves from facility to facility, he also has to wait to be placed into school. There's a waiting list for most programs. This time could be as short as a week or as long as months, depending on the program. There is a definite loss in the continuity of learning. Sometimes a student misses important tape tests that are given at certain times of the year. And these are the tests that place students at different levels. Some guys complain that they have to start over at each new facility. If a person is a prisoner is transferred numerous times, a reason for the transfer should be provided, either security, staff-requested programming, etc. Someone should be held responsible for that prisoner moving so frequently so that the prisoner and his family understand why he is moving. The last concern I see is a lack of work or school opportunities in the system. More employment is needed, more factories, greenhouses for growing food, processing plants for the food that's grown, skilled work like cabinet making, animal training for the handicapped, computer repair, anything that will keep these guys busy. More classes, not just GED classes, would help. Financial management, health, geography, history, and science classes, parenting, and book clubs would add knowledge to guys who are ignorant about a lot of the world. I had many guys who had never gotten a paycheck. They had always been paid under the table. They knew nothing about writing a check, opening a bank account, nothing to do with how to fill out tax forms. They really do need some kind of basic information, not things that are on the GED test, but just life skills. More and updated vocational programs are also needed. When I retired from Bellamy Creek, the level 4 guys had only one vocational class to take, custodial maintenance. In closing, I would ask you to keep nonviolent people out of prison to begin with. The cost of keeping someone locked up for a year, $56,000, we heard this morning. Save money by being creative in punishment. In this day and age, with the technology available, prisoners should be for those really violent people who need to be locked away. Judges should be allowed more discretion in sentencing. Use more halfway houses. Do more to keep people outside the prison system so they can do useful things to pay for their crimes. And for those inside the system, we need to make the effort to treat them as we'd like our own sons and daughters to be treated. Thank you for letting me speak.